Mycenae is an archaeological site in Greece located about 90 kilometers southwest of Athens, in the northeastern Peloponnese. Argos is 11 kilometers to the south, Corinth, 48 kilometers to the north. For the hill on which the palace was located, one can see across the Argolid to the Saronic Gulf. In the 2nd millennium BC, Mycenae was one of the major centers of Greek civilization, a military stronghold which dominated much of southern Greece. The period of Greek history from about 1600 BC to about 1100 BC is called Mycenaean in reference to Mycenae. At its peak in 1350 BC, the citadel and lower town had a population of 30,000 and an area of 32 hectares. The first correct identification of Mycenae in modern literature was during a survey commissioned by the Proveditore Generale of the Kingdom of the Morea in 1700, which used Pausanias's description of the Lion Gate to identify the ruins. Name. Although the citadel was built by Greeks, the name Mycenae is thought not to be Greek but rather one of the many pre-Greek place names inherited by the immigrant Greeks. Legend has it that the name was connected to the Greek word Myces. Thus, Pausanias ascribes the name to the legendary founder Perseus, who was said to have named it either after the cap of the sheath of his sword, or after a mushroom he had plucked on the site. The earliest written form of the name is Mycon, which is found in Homer. The reconstructed Mycenaean Greek name of the site is Mycenae, which has the form of a plural like Athens. The change of a to e in more recent versions of the name is the result of a well-known sound change in later Attic Ionic history. Neolithic to Middle Bronze Age. Mycenae, an Acropolis site, was continuously inhabited from the early Neolithic down through the early Hellardage and Middle Hellardage periods. Rainbow ware constitutes the earliest ceramic evidence discovered so far. Pottery material spanning the entire EHI through EHII period was discovered in 1877 to 1878 by Starmatakis at a low depth in the 6th shaft grave in Grave Circle A. Further ANMH material was found beneath the walls and floors of the palace, on the summit of the Acropolis, and outside the Lion Gate in the area of the ancient cemetery. An AMH settlement was discovered near a freshwater well on top of the Kalkana Hill southwest of the Acropolis. The first burials in pits assist graves manifest in the MH period on the west slope of the Acropolis, which was at least partially enclosed by the earliest circuit wall. Late Bronze Age. During the Bronze Age, the pattern of settlement at Mycenae was a fortified hill surrounded by hamlets and estates, in contrast to the dense urbanity on the coast. Since Mycenae was the capital of a state that ruled or dominated much of the eastern Mediterranean world, the rulers must have placed the stronghold in this less populated and more remote region for its defensive value. Since there are few documents on site with datable contents and since no dendrochronology has yet been performed upon the remains here, the events are listed here according to Hellardage period material culture. Late Hellardage I. Outside the partial circuit wall, Grave Circle B, named for its enclosing wall, contained 10 cist graves in Middle Hellardage style and several shaft graves, sunk more deeply, with interments resting in cists. Richer grave goods mark the burials as possibly regal. Mounds over the top contained broken drinking vessels and bones from a repast, testifying to a more than ordinary farewell. Stelae surmounted the mounds. A walled enclosure, Grave Circle A, included 6 more shaft graves, with 9 female, 8 in male, and 2 juvenile interments. Grave goods were more costly than in Circle B. The presence of engraved and inlaid swords and daggers, with spear points and arrowheads, leave little doubt that warrior chieftains and their families were buried here. Some art objects obtained from the graves of the Silver Sea Triton, the Mask of Agamemnon, the Cup of Nestor, and weapons both votive and practical. Late Hail Age 2. Alan Weiss divided the 9 Tholos tombs of Mycenae into 3 groups of 3, each based on architecture. His earliest, the Cyclopean tomb Amenhotep and the tomb of Aegisthus, are dated to Lhia. Burial in tholoi is seen as replacing burial in shaft graves. The care taken to preserve the shaft graves testifies that they were by then part of the royal heritage. The tombs of the ancestral heroes, being more visible, the tholoi all had been plundered either in antiquity or in later historic times. Late Hail Age 3. At a conventional date of 1350 BC, the fortifications on the Acropolis and other surrounding hills were rebuilt in a style known as Cyclopean because the blocks of stone used were so massive that they were thought in later ages to be the work of the one-eyed giants known as the Cyclopes. Within these walls, much of which can still be seen, successive monumental palaces were built. The final palace, remains of which are currently visible on the Acropolis of Mycenae, dates to the start of Lhia. 2. Earlier palaces must have existed, but they had been cleared away or built over. The construction of palaces at the time with a similar architecture was general throughout southern Greece. They all featured a megaron, or throne room, with a raised central hearth under an opening in the roof, which was supported by 4 columns in a square around the hearth. A throne was placed against the center of a wall to the side of the hearth, allowing an unobstructed view of the ruler from the entrance. Frescoes adorned the plaster walls and floor. The room was accessed from a courtyard with a columned portico. A grand staircase led from a terrace below to the courtyard on the Acropolis. In the temple built within the citadel, a scarab of Queen Tia of Egypt, who was married to Amenhotep III, was placed in the room of the idols alongside at least one statue of either Lhia 2 or B1 type. Amenhotep III's relations with Mwkinu*Mukanna have corroboration from the inscription at Kom-Alhetan, but Amenhotep's reign is thought to align with late Lhia. 1. It is likely that Amenhotep's herald presented the scarab to an earlier generation, which then found the resources to rebuild the citadel as Cyclopean and then to move the scarab here. Weiss's second group of tholoi are dated between Lhia and Lhia. Cato Thaunos Panagia Tholis, and the Lion Tomb. The final group, Group 3, the treasury of Atreus, the tomb of Clytemnestra, and the tomb of the Genii, are dated to Lhia by a shed under the threshold of the treasury of Atreus, the largest of the 9 tombs. Like the treasury of Minyas at Orchomenus, the tomb had been looted of its contents and its nature as funerary monument had been forgotten. The structure bore the traditional name of treasury. The pottery phases on which the relative dating scheme is based do not allow very precise dating, even augmented by the few existing C14 dates due to the tolerance inherent in these. The sequence of further construction at Mycenae is approximately as follows. In the middle of Lhia, around 1250 BC or so, the Cyclopean wall was extended on the west slope to include Grave Circle A. The main entrance through the circuit wall was made grand by the best-known feature of Mycenae, the Lion Gate, through which passed a stepped ramp leading past Circle A and up to the palace. The Lion Gate was constructed in the form of a relieving triangle in order to support the weight of the stones. An undecorated postern gate also was constructed through the north wall, one of the few groups of excavated houses in the city outside the walls lies beyond Grave Circle B and belongs to the same period. The House of Shields, the House of the Oil Merchant, the House of the Sphinxes, and the West House. These may have been both residences and workshops. Citadel facts and figures: circuit length 1105 m, preserved height up to 12.5 m, Width 7.5-17 m. Minimum stone required 145,215 cu. m. 14,420. Average stones time to move one block using men 2.125 days. Time to move all blocks using men 110.52 years. Time to move one block using oxen 0.125 days. Time to move all blocks using oxen 9.9 years based on 8-hour workday. The largest stones, including the lintels and gate jambs, weighed well over 20 tons. Some may have been close to 100 tons. Somewhat later, toward the end of Lhiib, another extension to the citadel was undertaken. The wall was extended again on the northeast, with a sally port and also a secret passage through and under the wall, of cobbled construction, leading downward by some 99 steps to a cistern carved out of rock 15 meters below the surface. It was fed by a tunnel from a spring on more distant higher ground. Already in Lhii 1, Egypt knew Mukanna by name as a capital city on the level of Thebes and Knossos. During Lhiib, Mycenae's political, military and economic influence likely extended as far as Crete, Pylos in the western Peloponnese, and to Athens and Thebes. Hellenic settlements already were being placed on the coast of Anatolia. A collision with the Hittite Empire over the sometime dependency at a then strategic location, Troy, was to be expected. In folklore, the powerful Peloponnese family ruled many Greek states, one branch of which was the Archaic dynasty at Mycenae. Declined by 1200 BC, the power of Mycenae was declining. Finally, during the 12th century BC, Mycenaean dominance collapsed entirely. The eventual destruction of Mycenae formed part of the general Bronze Age collapse in the Greek mainland and beyond. Within a short time, around 1200 BC, all the palace complexes of southern Greece were burned, including that at Mycenae. This was traditionally attributed by scholars to a Dorian invasion of Greeks from the north, although many historians now doubt that this invasion caused the destruction of the Mycenaean centers. Displaced populations escaped to former colonies of the Mycenaeans in Anatolia and elsewhere, where they came to speak the Ionic dialect. Emily Vermeulen suggests that the disruption of commercial networks at the end of the 13th century BC was disastrous for Greece, and this was followed by the coming of the mysterious sea peoples, who caused chaos in the Aegean. According to Egyptian records, the sea peoples destroyed the Hittite Empire, then attacked the 19th and the 20th dynasties of Egypt. They may be related with the destruction of the Mycenaean centers. However, at the end of Lhiib period, the Mycenaeans undertook an expedition against Troy, which meant that the sea was safe with no indication of destruction in the Aegean islands. Another theory has drought as the primary cause behind the Mycenaean decline, but there is no climatological evidence to support this. Manlius Andronikos claimed that internal conflicts involving social revolutions were the sole cause behind the destruction of Mycenaean sites, but this is contradicted by the fact that all the Mycenaean centers throughout Greece were destroyed almost simultaneously. George E. Mylonis noticed that after 1200 BC, some attempt was made for recovery in Mycenae. He believes that in the Argolid there was internal fighting, and this was followed by the Dorian invasion. It seems that the Dorians moved southward gradually in small clans, until they managed to establish themselves. Amos Anua argues that earthquakes played a major role in the destruction of Mycenae and many other cities at the end of the Bronze Age. However, no conclusive evidence has been brought forward to confirm any theory of why the Mycenaean citadel and others throughout Greece fell almost Simultaneously at this time, whatever the cause, by the LHIIIC period, Mycenae was no longer a major power. Pottery and decorative styles were changing rapidly, with craftsmanship and fine art undergoing a decline. Although settlements were significantly reduced in size, the citadel remained occupied but never regained its earlier importance. Archaic and Classical periods. A temple dedicated to Hera was built on the summit of the Mycenaean citadel during the Archaic period. A Mycenaean contingent fought at Thermopylae and Plataea during the Persian Wars. In 468 BC, however, troops from Argos captured Mycenae, expelled the inhabitants and razed the fortifications. Revival and abandonment. Mycenae was briefly reoccupied in the Hellenistic period, when it could boast a theatre. The site was subsequently abandoned, and by the Roman period in Greece its ruins had become a tourist attraction. The ancient travel writer Pausanias, for example, visited the site and briefly described the prominent fortifications and the Lion Gate, still visible in his time. Political organization. It appears that the Mycenaean state was ruled by kings identified by the title 1 Archar in the Linear B inscriptions at Knossos and Pylos. In the Homeric poems, the word form is annex, often translated in English as Lord. Some inscriptions with a list of offerings indicate that the king was probably divine, but the term for the king is usually accompanied by another name. It is doubtful that the Wanax was responsible for religious matters, but probably his title indicates that his right to rule was given by the god. The term Qac, which was later used in Greece for king, was apparently used for the chief of any group of people, or for a provincial official. The land possessed by the king is usually called taimino, a word that survived in classical Greece. Other important landowners were the Roarchaetar, the leader of the people, and the Tairitar, the officials. Loegetas is placed next to the king and he could be the leader of the army, but this is not confirmed by the inscriptions. Leonard Robert Palmer suggests that the Telestae were the men of Tellus, the fief holders. The Equetar were a group of nobles who followed the king in peace and war. There is also at least one instance of a person, Encleon at Pylos, who appears titleless in the written record but whom modern scholars regard as being probably a king. From the existing evidence, it seems that the kingdom was further subdivided into 16 districts. The Korite was the governor of the district, and the Porokorite was the deputy. It is possible that the real names were Korita and Prokorita. The Armokoro was an official appointment, but his duties are not very clear. The communal land was held at the hands of Armo, or plot holders. It seems that Demo was a collective body of men representing the local district. It is suggested that Qac had a council of elders, but Palmer believes that it was an organization of bronzesmiths. Religion. Much of the Mycenaean religion survived into classical Greece in the pantheon of Greek deities, but it is not known to what extent Greek religious belief is Mycenaean, nor how much is a product of the Greek Dark Ages or later. Moses I. Finley detected only few authentic Mycenaean beliefs in the 8th century Homeric world, but Nielsen suggested that the Mycenaean religion was the mother of the Greek religion. Through oral tradition, Homer transferred the beliefs during the Dark Ages, but he kept in memory the confederacy of the Greeks under the powerful king of Mycenae, when gods walked along friendly with men, and the heroic age, when great heroes dominated the scene. The belief in gods as embodiments of power, the heroic outlook inherited from a distant past together with the local Donic cults, were later fitted into the frame of the city-states. For the history traced by Nielsen and Guthrie, the Mycenaean pantheon consisted of Minoan deities, but also of gods and goddesses who appear under different names with similar functions in East and West. Many of these names appearing in the Linear B inscriptions can be found later in classical Greece like Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Athena, Hermes, Elilia and Dionysos, but the etymology is the only evidence of the cults. There are several reasonable guesses that can be made. However, it seems that originally the Mycenaeans, like many Indo-Europeans, considered divine any object that inherited an internal power. Certain religious beliefs were mixed with the beliefs of the local populations, as it appears in the old cults of isolated Arcadia, which survived up to classical Greece. In these cults, Poseidon appears usually as a horse, representing the river spirit of the underworld, as it usually happens in northern European folklore. The precursor goddesses of Demeter and Persephone are closely related with the springs and the animals, and especially with Poseidon and Artemis, who was the first nymph. Mycenaean religion was almost certainly polytheistic, and the Mycenaeans were actively syncretistic, adding foreign deities to their pantheon of deities with considerable ease. The Mycenaeans probably entered Greece with a pantheon of deities headed by some ruling sky deity, which linguists speculate might have been called *dias in early Indo-European. In Greek, this deity would become Zeus. Among the Hindus, this sky deity becomes Dios Pitta. In Latin he becomes Deus Pater or Jupiter. We still encounter this word in the etymologies of the words deity and divine. Later in some cults, Zeus is united with the Aegean great goddess, who is represented by Hera in their holy wedding. At some point in their cultural history, the Mycenaeans adopted some Minoan goddesses like Athia, Britomartis, Dictina, and associated them with the sky god. Many of them were absorbed by more powerful divinities, and some, like the vegetation goddesses Ariadne and Helen, survived in Greek folklore together with the cult of the divine child, who was probably the precursor of Dionysos. Athena and Hera survived and were tutelary goddesses, the guardians of the palaces and the cities. In general, later Greek religion distinguishes between two types of deities: the Olympian or sky deities, which are now commonly known in some form or another, and the chthonic deities, or deities of the earth. Walter Burkert warns, to what extent one can and must differentiate between Minoan and Mycenaean religion as a question which has not yet found a conclusive answer. Quote, he suggests that useful parallels will be found in the relations between Etruscan and Archaic Greek culture and religion, or between Roman and Hellenistic culture. The pantheon also included deities representing the powers of nature and wildlife, who appear with similar functions in the Mediterranean region. The mistress of the animals, later called Artemis, may be identified as the Minoan goddess Britomartis. Dictina. Poseidon is the lord of the sea, and therefore of storms and earthquakes. He may have functioned as a pre-Hellenic chthonic Zeus, the lord and spouse of the earth goddess. Athena, whose task was to protect the olive trees, is a civic Artemis. The powers of animal nature fostered a belief in nymphs whose existence was bound to the trees and the waters, and in gods with human forms and the heads and tails of animals who stood for primitive bodily instincts. In Arcadia were depicted animal-headed gods, indicating that in the remote past the gods were conceived as animals and birds, in a surrounding of animal-headed demons. Later the gods were revealed in human forms with an animal as a companion, a symbol. Some of the old gods survived in the cult of Dionysos and Pan. The Mycenaeans adopted, probably from the East, a priest-king system and a belief of a ruling deity in the hands of a theocratic society. At the end of the second millennium BC, when the Mycenaean palaces collapsed, it seems that Greek thought was gradually released from the idea that each man was a servant to the gods, and sought a moral purpose. It is possible that this procedure started before the end of the Mycenaean age, but the idea is almost absent of vague in the Homeric poems, where the interference of the gods is not related to the rightness or wrongness of men's actions. Later, Hesiod uses a lot of Eastern material in his cosmology and in the genealogical trees of the gods, and he introduces the idea of the existence of something else behind the gods, which was more powerful than they. This is the powerful Fate, who in the Homeric poems is acting in parallel with the gods and predestinates the events. Hesiod complies to the Greek desire of an order in the universe, and tries to bring the gods under a rule comparable to the rule which controls the lives of men. In Greek mythology, this power is named Nanka. The Olympian pantheon is an ordered system. The Greek divinities live with Zeus at the helm, and each is concerned with a recognizable sphere. However, certain elements in some Greek cults indicate the survival of some older cults from a less rationalized world. Old cults of the dead, agrarian magic, exorcism of evil spirits, peculiar sacrifices, and animal-headed gods. In the Homeric poems, the avenging Fate was probably originally a demon acting in parallel with the gods. Later, the cult of Dionysos Zagreus indicates that lifeblood of animals was needed to renew that of men. A similar belief may be guessed from the Mycenaean Triad sarcophagus, which combines features of Minoan civilization and Mycenaean style. It seems that the blood of a bull was used for the regeneration of the reappearing dead. Probably most of these cults existed in the Mycenaean period and survived by immemorial practice. A secondary level of importance was the cult of the heroes, which seems to have started in the Mycenaean era. These were great men of the past who were exalted to honor after death, because of what they had done. According to an old Minoan belief, beyond the sea there was an island called Elysion, where the departed could have a different but happier existence. Later, the Greeks believed that there could live in human form only heroes and the beloved of the gods. The souls of the rest would drift unconsciously in the gloomy space of Hades. Gods and men had common origins, but there was an enormous gap between the immortal gods and mortal men. However, certain elements indicate that the Mycenaeans probably believed in a future existence. Two well-preserved bodies were found in Shaft grave Via, and Wolfgang Helberg believed that an embalming preceded the burial. In the Shaft graves discovered by Heinrich Schliemann, the corpses were lightly exposed to fire in order to preserve them. Mycenaean religion certainly involved offerings and sacrifices to the deities, and some have speculated that the ceremonies involved human sacrifice based on textual evidence and bones found outside tombs. In the Homeric poems, there seems to be a lingering cultural memory of human sacrifice in King Agamemnon's sacrifice of his daughter, Iphigenia. Several of the stories of Trojan heroes involve tragic human sacrifice. In the far past, even human beings might be offered to placate inscrutable gods, especially in times of guilty fear. Later, sacrifice became a feast at which oxen were slaughtered. Men kept the meat and gave the gods the bones wrapped in fat. Beyond this speculation we can go no further. Somewhere in the shades of the centuries between the fall of the Mycenaean civilization and the end of the Greek Dark Ages, the original Mycenaean religion persisted and adapted until it finally emerged in the stories of human devotion, apostasy, and divine capriciousness that exists in the two great epic poems of Homer. It was the beginning of the religion which later the Greeks considered Hellenic, and embodies a paradox. Though the world is dominated by a divine power that the gods bestow in different ways on men, nothing but darkness lay ahead, and life was sometimes frail and unsubstantial.